right, welcome everybody. I assume you can hear me. Raise your hand if you can in fact hear what I'm saying. Some people are raising their hands. I assume that means the rest of you can't hear me. I'm just kidding. All right. An important topic, the disclosures. And I'm going to show you how to get them. What are they? What do you need to do with them? And what I'm going to do is sort of mix and match as we go along, because some of them are something the seller ought to do and some of them are something the buyer ought to do. And I'm sort of mixing that together right now because I'm too lazy to make two different classes. There will be coming up in my series I'll do something about what do you do once you list a house, right? And how you take care of all these different things. Let me just make sure. All right, microphone is right. All right, cool. So there are some handouts, all right, for those of you that are looking for a handout. If the handout doesn't work, send us an email, and for a nominal fee, we'll send you a copy of the handout. And so what I wanted to start with, and whether you look at the handout or not, is paragraph 10. This is of the residential purchase agreement. And paragraph 10 talks about statutory and other disclosures, including lead-based paint, hazard disclosures, and cancellation rights. And what I wanted to just cover was, it begins with these magic words, the seller shall, right? Now, every time it says the seller shall, that's a requirement for the seller to do something in the contract. Buyer shall, that means something the buyer is supposed to do. And it says within the time period specified in 14A, right? And in 14A, it says you have 5 days to turn over copies of any disclosures that you have. Delivered to buyer, if required by law, a fully completed federal lead-based paint disclosures form, FLD, and pamphlet, right? Lead-based paint. Now, can anybody tell me if I had a house that was built in 1978, like the house was built in 1978, do I need to provide, if I represent the seller, or if I am the seller, do I need to give a lead-based paint disclosure? House was built in 1978. How many say yes? You can wave your hand. I've got a poll coming up, but I forgot to do this one. I've got a bunch of yeses. I see some yeses. How many? So I'm going to put down the hand so I can keep it. How many say no? No, house was built in 1978. You don't have to do a lead-based paint. I don't really see any no, so I guess that means everybody except me has picked yes. Everybody except me, I guess, in this group. And the answer is no, you don't have to do a lead-based paint disclosure. Why not? Because the law says the property has to be built prior to 1978, before 1978. I have a transaction where I'm helping an agent with the transaction coordinator. The house was built in 1978. The transaction coordinator on the other side is demanding a copy of the lead-based paint. We're not going to give it to them, right? Not going to give it to them, right? You don't want, by the way, if you represent the seller, to make disclosures that you don't have to make, particularly after escrow has opened. Because there's a place that says in the purchase agreement that if you make a new disclosure, it triggers a cancellation right on the buyer. So when somebody says, I want you to do it anyhow because the transaction coordinator has it on their list, because our office has it on the list, so we can do it anyhow. If you represent the seller, don't do it, right? Don't do it, not after escrow is open. Now, if you want to do stuff like this before you open escrow, that's up to you, but I don't get it. Right, but we don't make disclosures. The contract does not require, and the law does not require after escrow is open. And then it goes on to say, unless exempt, fully completed disclosures and notices required by 1102. 1102 is the transfer disclosure. Statutory disclosures are include but are not limited to the transfer disclosure statement, the natural hazard disclosure statement, notice or actual knowledge or release of illegally controlled substances, special tax assessments, or is it in a Melrose Community Facilities Act, or is there a bond? And if the seller has actual knowledge of industrial or military use ordinance, and this has to be done in the form SPQ, which is the seller property questionnaire, or the ESD, which sounds like some meditation group, I don't know, but that's the exempt statutory disclosures, right? At some point, we're gonna take a look at that form. So what this is saying is you have to do whatever the law requires, including the TDS, the NHD, the Melrose, and supplemental taxes. Then it says in paragraph 2, any statutory disclosures required by this paragraph is considered fully completed if seller has answered all questions. All right. Let's stop there for a moment. Right? Let's stop there for a moment. In a different life at a different company, there was an agent who had listed a house, and the seller had done the TDS and the SPQ, the transfer disclosure statement, the seller property questionnaire. We're in contract, right? And then things start to fall apart. The buyer, the engineer, notices that in some documents it has 1 square footage for the lot, and in other documents it has a different square footage for the lot. The guy goes to the property and measures the lot, took some engineer friends, and concluded that the smaller number was in fact the correct number. And so they come to the seller and they say, we want you to credit, it was like $11,000. This was like a $1.6 million property. But anyhow, they wanted like $11,000 or $18,000. The seller said, no way am I giving you any money because of the lot size. Their agent, and by this time, for whatever reason, I'm not going to go into those details, I was asked to take over this transaction, right? Because the seller and the listing agent weren't talking anymore and had blocked each other's phone calls. So the agent representing the buyer is kind of smart. And they go through, you understand there are no contingencies in this contract. There are no contingencies in the contract. So the buyer's agent goes through all the forms and finds that there were 2 questions in the seller property questionnaire that the seller did not answer. 2 questions. Now notice what paragraph 10A2 says, that it's not over until all of the questions have been answered. So they give us a notice to perform, asking us to answer those 2 questions. Now you see where this is going, because if you modify the SPQ and the TDS, it triggers, if you amend it in any way, a 3-day right of rescission, minimum maybe 5 days, depending on how you communicated it to the buyer. Now, they were doing this as a way of extorting the money out of us by saying, we can cancel now, we can cancel now, we made you answer more questions. Right now, we answered the questions and the answers were no. They said, we're going to cancel now. And I said, BS, because it also says in the purchase agreement that any use of the cancellation rights has to be in good faith. And I pointed out to them that the seller said no to both of the questions. So there was nothing disclosed that they did not know of. But you understand the point here is, what if they had said yes to either of those 2 questions and there was actually something that was remotely material, the buyer could cancel the contract even though they didn't have any contingencies. So if you're representing the seller, you might think that your broker and transaction coordinator are just picky because they go through the TDS and the SPQ and they find things that weren't answered and they highlight them and they send you snippy notes telling you to get this answered. There's more to it than just being snippy, right? If it's not fully completed, if they didn't answer all of the questions, it's not done. And the notice to perform based upon that paragraph would require the seller to answer the other questions. Same, right? I guess where I'm going with this is that if you're the listing agent or the selling agent, you ought to carefully read the TDS and the SBQ. And completed and signed the seller's sections, and the seller's agent has completed the seller's brokerage firm, if applicable, an agent visual inspection disclosure. Now, let me just stop here for a second. The seller sections, let's just go through this. So we're still talking about what makes a complete TDS. And I've been told that my classes are complete TDS. They're tedious, I don't know. It says the seller has to do the seller section. And the seller's agent, if any, has to do the signed brokerage firm sections or an AVID. Now, notice it doesn't say anything yet about the buyer's agent. Doesn't say anything yet about the buyer's agent. So there's who's responsible to, it's the responsibility of the listing agent, yes, to see that this is done. If you're the listing agent, you ought to read the TDS and SBQ and make sure. If you have a good transaction coordinator, they would be reminding you, right? But as the listing agent, you ought to read it. And you ought to make sure they answered every question. And if they didn't, you got to get them to answer the other questions. Now, later in another class, I'm going to go through how to use Glide and other things, which makes it hard for them not to answer a question, right? It makes it hard. But if you do it old school where you print the thing out and let them write on it by hand, I don't know why people do that, but maybe they're afraid of computers. So anyhow, back to my point, which is that this is saying it's complete when the seller has done the seller's part and the listing agent, the seller's agent, has done their part. What about the buyer's agent? If the buyer's agent does not do an AVID, this would be another good poll question. If the buyer's agent does not do an AVID, does that mean that the transfer disclosure obligation has not been met? And the answer is no. And that's because the seller and the listing agent don't have much control over the buyer's agent and what they do. I make the comment that the buyer's agent is oftentimes referred to as the cooperating agent. But then I point out that sometimes they're not, all that cooperative, right? They're not, so we can't make the buyer's agent do what they do. But if the seller and the listing agent have satisfied the TDS and given it to the buyer, that's enough. Then it goes on to say, nothing stated herein relieves a buyer's brokerage firm, if any, from the obligation to conduct the competent and diligent visual inspection of the accessible areas of the property and disclose material facts affecting the value and desirability of the property that were or should have been revealed by such an and complete the disclosures. Now, notice what that's saying is the law requires the buyer agent to do that. But if the buyer agent doesn't do it, it doesn't mean that it's not a complete TDS and SBQ, right? Doesn't mean. So, if the buyer's agent doesn't do it, it's bad, it's bad. But it doesn't invalidate the transaction as it would if there was not a, complete TDS. Waiver of these and the lead-based paint disclosures is prohibited by law. Can't waive it. Now, I've had sellers say, it's an investment property and I never lived in it and I bought it 10 years ago and it's been done by renters and I ain't going to fill out the form because you guys are just trying to trick me, right? That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to trick me into answering questions when I don't know anything about the property. I'm not going to answer any of the questions, right? And I've actually told sellers that I checked again with this in the civil code and that their name was not specifically mentioned as being exempt from this law. I was surprised because you sounded so sure. But the fact that the seller doesn't live there, has never lived there, does not mean the seller doesn't have to do this. Right? But I've had some refuse. What would you do if you were the listing agent and the seller refused to fill out their part of the TDS? And the answer is you would say that's bad and fill out your AVID and get on with your life, right? That's a problem that the seller's going to have. Now your office is going to be unhappy, but I'm just saying I don't know how to make them do things either, the sellers. Within the time period specified in 14A, 5 days, seller exempt unless exempt from the obligation to provide a TDS, shall complete and provide buyer with a seller property questionnaire. Now, the seller property questionnaire is not required by the California Civil Code, right? It's required by the California Association of Realtors Residential Purchase Agreement. Now, some of you hearing the sound of my voice might be in, San Mateo County, right? You might be a member of Silvar or Samcar. Those are the associations that are sort of up in that area. And you will know that there is a different contract form that is used by some offices up there called the PRDS form. And I actually am old enough to know what PRDS stands for, which is the Peninsula Regional Data Service. At one point, it was its own association, MLS. All of that is gone. It's just a form, right? Just a bunch of forms. In that form, it doesn't mention the seller property questionnaire. It talks about the seller supplemental checklist, right? So if you're if you're the listing agent, let me just make this clear, and your client has filled out an SPQ, and you accept an offer using the PRDS form, you should know that that contract says your SPQ is not good enough, and that the seller is going to have to do another very long, asking a lot of the same questions, but a few new ones, another checklist, the seller supplemental checklist. And so you might want to maybe counter that part out, or just, tell people don't use a PRDS form. Just don't do it. If the seller is not required to provide a TDS, seller shall complete and provide an exempt seller disclosure, the ESD, right? Which we might look at maybe in a little bit. I don't know. Right? And it's a one-page thing with a lot fewer, right? A lot fewer. Buyer within the time 14B1 return copies. In the event seller or seller's brokerage firm prior to close of escrow becomes aware of adverse conditions materially affecting the property or any material inaccuracy in the disclosures, information, or representations previously provided to buyer, seller shall promptly provide a subsequent or amended disclosure or notice in writing covering those items. And notice it says is not required for conditions of material inaccuracies of which buyer is otherwise unaware or which are disclosed in reports provided to or obtained by buyer or ordered and paid by buyer. What that means is if the buyer gets a property inspection or a termite inspection and it finds something wrong, you can't say to the seller, I want you to change your TDS because there's a plumbing leak in the crawl space and you didn't put that down, right? No. But if the seller remembers that the dishwasher leaks under the house whenever it's run, and then says, oh yeah, I forgot. And when they asked on the TDS, are there any known plumbing leaks? The seller said, no, that requires an amended TDS. If any disclosure, this is 7, or notice specified in 10A or subsequent or amended disclosures or notices delivered to buyer after the offer is signed. If it is subsequent or amended disclosure or notice after the offer is signed, buyer shall have the right to cancel this agreement within 3 days after delivery in person, or 5 days by deposit in the mail, or by an electronic record, which means like email. All right. This is why, if you represent the seller, you want to make sure that all of the forms are filled out, right? Every question is answered. Give them time to think about it. Is there anything else? Then, of course, there's the hazard disclosures and other booklets. How many of you who've represented buyers have allowed your buyers to sign a receipt? You don't have to raise your hand because the Department of Real Estate wants me to tell them who answered this question in which way. But so you don't raise your hand, right? But it's something to think about. So you get a disclosure package from the seller, and in it is a receipt for all these booklets, right? The earthquake booklet, the lead-based paint booklet, the environmental hazard booklets. There's a whole bunch of booklets. How many of you, don't raise your hand, right? How many of you have allowed a buyer to sign that receipt without you knowing that they actually had a copy of the booklet? Oh, somebody raised their hand, but they took it down quickly. Sorry, DRE already got that. All right, already went. I'm sorry, it's already went. So I see this actually as a rather common thing, right? Now, can you give the booklets to the buyer in advance? And by the way, who is this one you can vote on, because the DRE isn't, this isn't really paying attention. You're probably surprised to hear that. So we can raise our hand and do a vote on this one. Which agent is required to make sure that the buyers get a copy of these booklets, right? If you believe it's the listing agent, raise your hand. Right. How many people believe it's the listing agent's job to see that the buyer has been given a copy of I don't know. How many of you think it's the buyer's agent responsibility to make sure that the buyer has been given a copy of those forms? And I've scared everybody from voting by mentioning that the DRC is monitoring. They're not really monitoring like that, so nobody has voted. All right, so seller shall, if required by law, seller shall. So the question is, which, we've got somebody guessing the buyer's agent, and some people are raising their hands now that I've stopped voting. So which agent would be helping with a seller shall? Would it be the buyer's agent that helps with seller shalls? Or would that be the listing agent? And the answer is it's the listing agent. So the short answer to the question, the seller agent doesn't communicate directly with buyer, right? Listing agent. The listing agent is responsible. So how are these guides, right? Seller shall deliver to buyer earthquake guides, questionnaire, environmental hazards booklet, home energy pamphlet rating, disclose of the properties in the flood zone, potential flood zone, inundation area, high fire hazard, and all these other zones. Seller shall deliver to buyer. How many of you have had a real estate transaction where, as far as you knew, the seller did not do this? Anybody? Yeah. So how is this actually done? So to me, there's two issues here. One is seller and the delivery to the buyer. Now, because I don't know, I choose to use property ID as a natural hazard disclosure. I haven't, because I like I like them, and I like the fact that the law, I like them for a lot of reasons. So I haven't actually been looking at a bunch of the other ones. But one of the things that property ID does in their NHD report is they include links to all of those forms. They include links. So the seller who provides the NHD report to the buyer through the links in the NHD report is given buyer access to all those pamphlets. However, when I represent buyers, sometimes I send it to them anyhow, because sometimes people have insomnia at night and they would like to have something to read, right? So I send it to them. So and you can send them through the CAR, and you could even get them to sign that you sent them through the CAR. That's through Zipforms and through the CAR library. But you're going to have to expect that the listing agent is going to give you a receipt and ask you to sign it anyhow, right? But where are the booklets? Well, they're usually contained in the NHD report. You might want to look at that and see if they are in the NHD report, and I would give them to the buyer. Withholding taxes, FERPTA, seller shall deliver to buyer or qualified substitute an affidavit on FERPTA. So I don't, frankly, even though the seller is going to fill out a FERPTA form, the title company is going to make them fill out their own form anyhow. Sometimes I've just said the title company is going to fill out the form and give it to the buyer. But notice what this is saying is within the time period in 14A, which is 5 days. Is the title company going to do their form and give it to the buyer in 5 days? And the answer is no, they're not going to do that. They're going to eventually do it, and that'll be part of all the papers that the buyer signs when the buyer signs off. So FERPTA, right? FERPTA, the Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act, in case you were wondering what it stood for, that's something that you ought to do if you're the listing agent, right? Now, different offices have different, rules about this. EXP, who I work with, they just want to see a copy of the FERPTA form by the time it closes. That makes them happy. However, I've had transaction coordinators who are pointing at this paragraph and saying, it's been 5 days, where's our FERPTA form? Because they've got it on a checklist. So if I represent a seller, I do it anyhow, because I know that somebody's going to probably complain if I don't. Then there's the Megan's Law database disclosure, which not only is here, but it's in most NHD reports. The gas and hazardous, the liquid transmission pipelines. Sometimes this is called LUST. I know, which stands for liquid underground storage tanks. You thought it was something racier than that. And and that's also typically included in an NHD report. And then there are the condominium, and it says seller has 7 days after acceptance to disclose to buyer if the property's in a condominium. And then they have 3 days after acceptance to request the HOA docs, any statement containing the location of storage spaces, 12 months of the HOA minutes, the names, pet restrictions, buyer's approval of the CI, common interest disclosures, as a contingency of this agreement. All right. So that's what the contract says about the different disclosures. All right. What about, I'll do that later. I'm going to go through some of these things. I'm going to do that later. We'll do that later. So what I would like to do is something else right now. Let's just, I'm going to log in. So before I do that, why don't we do something fun? I know you guys will. So let's say you represent a buyer. How do you get your hands on a copy of these disclosures? Right? I happen to have a few buyers that I'm working with right now. And in order to save time, because I'm lazy, time efficient, I decided I would show you based upon the properties my client wants to see. Right? I thought I would show you. So my client wants to buy a property in Mountain View, right? And he gave me a list of properties he's interested in seeing this weekend. So let's take a look at them, and we're going to see, how do you find the disclosures? Where are they? How do you get them? Right now, one of the properties we're going to look at is 620 Tyrella Avenue. Right, been on the market 32 days. I think we've looked at this once before. Where would you find it? Notice down here, it says in the private remarks, email listing agent for disclosures. Offers as they come. Yeah, it's been 30 days, right? Price reduced, motivated sellers. Now, I'm not sure if I've already done this, but I'm not sure if I've already done this, because I think I may have shown them the property, but I'll know in a moment. Yeah, I know. All right, let's just do that. Come on. No, how about, I don't want to, then I'm not going to log in if you're going to be like that. All right. Not now. I don't have time for you now. I don't have time now for that. All right. So, no, right? Not there. So what I would do is, this is how I would do this. I would scroll down to here. First of all, I'm going to look. All right, it just says email listing agent. Great. Click on this. Gmail loads. And then I'm also going to peek before I go there. What does it say about showing? It says call or text for an appointment. Well, I also want to get a copy of the disclosures. So I'm going to say, first of all, I'm going to change this. Okay, there we go. I, not now, have a interested client, an interested buyer, why not? I let Google write my emails for me. Please send a copy of the disclosures. We would like to see the property this Sunday morning, if possible. I'll bet it's possible. It's been on the market more than 30 days. I hit send, and then I wait to see if I get disclosures, right? So sometimes you have to email the agent, right? Sometimes you have to email the agent. Now, if I'm the listing agent, I don't want to do that kind of work, right? I want people to be able to just download the disclosures. What's another way? So here's another property we're going to look at. 284 North Rainsdorf. This one's only been on the market one day. I'm kind of surprised about Boyengas because they generally know what they're doing. So this is what I would typically do. This is the CalDRE link, right? So you paste that in. We want to see Sunday morning. I said 9 o'clock. Why don't we do that? Michael Devlin, email, add guests. Schedule event. All right. Now, what I've done is I've booked a showing on Sunday and I've notified the buyer. Notice it doesn't say, what does it say? Disclosures and inspections available at 3 p.m. Check back for a disclosures IO link. All right. Where else might we find disclosures? Some older agents like me have an old, what's called a Doc Central account, and there'd be a little icon here that looks like a couple of pieces of paper. Or down here, there's a disclosures URL, which isn't in there yet because they don't have them all done. All right, what other options are we? Here we have another one, and it's asking us to book showings. So I'm going to do that. And disclosures IO, yes. And so I'm going to do that. It's the Calendly URL is not valid. Okay. So what I typically do to be annoying is I, copy that, go back here. Which one am I doing? This one. Scroll down. Maybe they cut it off. Maybe before I send a snippy email to the listing agent, let me try it again. Nope, they're going to get a snippy email. There's just no other way to do it. So now I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to say, I'm going to hit send. Not always easy, right? Now, what else do we have here? Disclosures, here we go. IO link, yay, let me see. So now I'm going to copy that link, go up here, paste it in, hit enter. Very good. I am an agent. That's my information. I'm going to and hit submit. Now my buyer gets a copy of it too, right? Easy peasy, right? Easy peasy. So offer date Wednesday 3 at 2 p.m. That's why. Well, anyhow, maybe I screwed up. Maybe I shouldn't have sent her the email. Well, I just didn't. Now, one of the things that I've noticed, however, is that although it said the offer date was Wednesday, all that sort of thing, what I'm seeing is it is still an active listing, right? That's why I wasn't paying attention to it. So we'll see. The worst is going to be, I'm going to get a snippet email that says, hey, you missed the deadline, right? I can live with that. I'll just tell my client, we missed the deadline. So what is another option? Here's somebody who's using a tiny URL for the disclosures, right? They're all over the place, but we're going to just put that in and see what we get. Right, there it is, looks beautiful, looks just wonderful. How about that? There we go, agent firm. I am an agent, and here we go. Email files to yourself. And then when it comes in, Rocket Disclosures. Yeah, that's a new one. So there's Glide, there's Disclosures.io, there's Rocket Disclosures, there's Doc Central. There are a lot of different ways of doing this. So now that we've done this, let me go back here. Inbox, right? And what is Isabella's son? She has shared access to the property information packet with me. You can share with your buyers or click on the share button. Review it now. Why don't we do that? So even though it said, now, by the way, if you're the listing agent, you put into the MLS that you're taking offers yesterday and you didn't sell the property, you might want to update your remarks and, say, change it. So I'm going to share the package to the buyer. That's not it. Let me go back here. So you can see I have a program that remembers copies and pastes because I'm exceedingly lazy. And I just, oops, don't want to keep going back. What happened? What happened? Share package. There we go. That. How about that? All right. Then we're going to get on to something more fun than this. All right. So if you represent the buyer, first of all, you got to get your hands on a copy of the disclosures. I personally would rather, even though the listing agents would rather I maybe do it differently, I would rather to have the disclosures before I go show the property. Because sometimes what happens is the buyer looks at it and they say, I don't even want to see this property. And I'll just, rather not show them a property that they're not going to want to buy, right? So rather than showing them everything they want to look at and then, then giving them all the different documents, it would just seem to be easier to let them know in advance because maybe they don't want to see it. Now, this is this looks kind of typical, right? There's, a bunch of different things here. Interesting. There's some weird stuff here too. But there's a home inspection, a termite inspection, historic disclosures, which are past copies of property inspections and termite inspections. There's the NHD, the preliminary report. And then this is what would be a good thing to do if you represent a seller, is to get all of the documents together that you want the buyer to sign and stick them into one big package, right? And then there's different ways of signing it, which we're going to talk about maybe later, right? But let's just click on this for fun. What do we have? You have your market conditions advisory, which basically says don't make non-contingent offers, even though that means you won't get the property. And then we have the transfer disclosure statement, right? There we are. And what we're going to do is look at this for a second. It talks about she's filled it out, Mountain View, done all this. This statement is a disclosure of the condition of the above described property in compliance with section 1102 of the Civil Code as of. that might have been nice for the seller to put in that date. It is not a ordinary or not a warranty. Coordination with other disclosure forms. I mean, this bigger. There's a test coming up, by the way, in a minute. So pay attention. There's a test. The real estate transfer disclosure statement is made pursuant to sections 1102 of the Civil Code. Other statutes require disclosures depending on the details of a particular real estate transaction, special study zone, etc. Substituted disclosures. The following disclosures and other disclosures required by law, including the NHD report, may include have or will be made in connection. Notice she's checked additional inspection reports or disclosures. There was also this box, and then there was no substituted disclosures, right? You see those three boxes? Completed pursuant to the contract of sale, and additional reports which she's checked and wrote them in, no substituted disclosures. So let's do the quiz, all right? Because you guys, I think, are probably really, really good. I can tell you're a extremely intelligent group. And so that's not the right thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some quiz questions. Let me see if you guys can see them. I have to go over here. How do I get to my polls? Right, polls. Launch. Okay, launch a poll. Right, the first one, the first poll we're going to launch looks like this. Hard for me to see because it just is. Right, let me see if I can make it bigger so I can read it. Seller has inspection reports. Property termite. Should the box be checked for substituted disclosures? Like that one there. Answers are, you have two choices. You could say yes and put in the names of the reports and the date. She didn't do the date. Or no, the box, no substituted disclosures should be checked. And we're letting everybody vote, right? And it's back and forth, right? I guess we're asking, did she do it right? Did she do it right? And it's, first of all, yes was winning. It's kind of moderated a little bit. So far we have about, oh, it's changing. People keep going, you keep changing your votes, I think. That's what I think is happening. So 53% as of right now have said yes, and you put in the name of the report and the date. 44% said no. The substituted disclosures should be checked. No substituted disclosure should be checked. That's the right answer. That's the right answer, right? She should have checked the box, no substituted disclosures. Well, wait a second. They've got these reports. They've got them. So one of the things that I've included in the handouts is a clump of quick guides from our friends at the California Association of Realtors Legal Department, including one on the topic of substituted disclosures. What do we mean when we say a substituted disclosure? What we mean is a disclosure that substitutes for the transfer disclosure statement. In other words, it would be a document that you could give to the buyer in lieu of the seller filling out the TDS. That's not a real thing. It's not a real thing. Because it's true, it is true that 1102 of the California Civil Code says you can have substituted disclosures. It's true. That's what it says. And by the way, they've since added the no substituted disclosures for this transfer. It's true, that's what it says. However, the California courts have ruled that the law requires the seller to fill out the TDS, and that there aren't any disclosures that are substituted. So there's a question about what about probate? Probate is an exempt transaction, and you don't have to do a TDS. So now people, so why do they have that box if what I'm saying and what CAR is saying is that you really don't ever get a chance to use it? And the answer is, I didn't write the law, right? When they wrote the law, they thought that would be a good thing, so they added the no substituted disclosures. Maybe we could get a raise of hands on this. We should just leave all the boxes blank. Wouldn't that be great? Just leave them all blank. Just don't check any box. That would be the safe way. Wouldn't that be the safe way of doing this? Leaving them all blank? No, because remember that it has to be fully completed. And courts have ruled that if you don't check a box, then you haven't completed it. So what would you typically do? You would click the box, no substituted disclosures for this transfer. That doesn't mean you don't have a property inspection, a termite inspection, a roof inspection, a chimney inspection, all those inspections. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to be giving them to the buyer and that's part of your disclosure package. It means that those reports do not substitute for the seller and, for that matter, the listing agent filling out their AVID. Wasn't that fun? Wasn't that fun? I thought I enjoyed it. I did, even though, I don't know, maybe not everybody did. All right, so that was wonderful. Wasn't that wonderful? How about this? I should have done this one. I should have made you answer all of them first. I'm going to do that. So how about this? The TDS mentions the NHD report. Is this a substituted disclosure? See, I should have done that one first. I would have gotten some people's advice on it. The answer is no, it's not. It doesn't substitute for anything, right? And I'm glad to see that nobody has picked what's an NHD report, right? Which is one of the choices that I gave people. All right. That one, was a lot easier because I answered it already. How about this? Is that the one I wanted to do next? Yeah. You're the buyer's agent. You never got a chance to see the property. Your buyer wants to buy it without seeing it. They saw there's a virtual tour. That's what VT stands for. But as a buyer's agent, you're supposed to fill out an ABID. So the question is, what do? You have not seen the property. Let's say the property's in, I don't know, Elk Grove, right? Do you jump in your car and drive to Elk Grove? I didn't put that down as a choice. So here are your choices. In this one, you can pick more than one, right? You're not limited to one answer. So one of the choices is why don't you just copy whatever the listing agent said, right? Whatever the listing agent said, heck, they know the property better than, they know the property pretty good. The other choice is you could copy what the property inspector wrote, right? Just look at their summary and write all that down. Or another choice is just don't fill out the AVID. You never saw the property, so don't fill it out. Or you could look at the pictures and watch the virtual tour and then do the best you can, but admit that you didn't actually see the property. And I see we've got a lot of people voting, but I'm not really too sure because it's hard for me to tell what people voted for because I don't know, it was a weird poll. And do you know what the answer is? The answer is the final one. You would use the pictures of the virtual tour and then admit that you did not in fact see the property. Well, how are you going to write that up? Check out my handouts. I've included a California Association of Realtors magic words, right, in one of the quick guides as to what would you put in if you hadn't seen the property. Now remember, if the buyer's agent screws up their AVID, that does not necessarily invalidate the contract or the transaction. It's the listing agent and the seller where there's mostly an issue. All right, how about one more? And again, I think you can choose more than one. I think so. The listing agent includes among all of the disclosure documents an addendum. And I've seen this a few times recently, and it says in the addendum, among other weird things, property is sold as is, where is, right? They wrote that in. What does this mean? And again, I think you can make multiple choices. Does it mean that the seller won't have to make any repairs? Right? You can choose more than one. Does it mean the seller has fewer disclosures? Let me say, does it mean the buyer has waived their inspection rights? Or finally, this is a bad idea and you shouldn't do it? And the answer is, this is a bad idea and you shouldn't do it. First of all, it doesn't have anything to do with the seller not or making repairs. So does the buyer, even though it says as is, does that mean that the buyer is not allowed legally to ask for repairs? No, it doesn't mean that. Seller can ask for repair. Buyer can ask for repairs. Seller could say, well, I'm selling it as is, I ain't fixing stuff. Well, okay, but that's actually not a good response, right? The good response would be to the specific request. And by the way, there are certain jurisdictions that have minimum mandatory retrofit provisions, which are imposed upon the seller and cannot be waived by the contract. Cannot be waived. Some of my people are in Southern California, and there's a lot more of them down there, right? And Santa Cruz has some. There's some of them around here. So even though the contract says the seller is selling it as is and ain't going to fix anything, that doesn't necessarily mean the seller doesn't have to fix anything, right? Because local jurisdictions may have rules and it will require that they fix something. Right? And I don't know how to see what people voted for when I have multiple ones. Does the seller have reduced disclosures? The answer is no, and as is clause doesn't do anything. Does it mean that the buyer has waived their inspection rights? The answer is no, the buyer still can do inspections. What if the buyer doesn't have any contingencies? Can the buyer still do inspections? The answer is yes. Paragraph 14D5, 14D5 says that the buyer still, even if they don't have inspection rights, they still, even if they don't have contingencies, they still have inspection rights. So why would I say this is a bad idea? Don't do it. And the reason is because the residential purchase contract already says that the property is being sold as is and in its present condition. And what would happen if this ever went to like an arbitrator or a court, right? If it went to, and so somebody is saying, isn't the PRDS contract more pro buyer? Yes, you could say the PRDS contract because it still contains buyer warranties, but when you check a box on that contract, they all get lined out, which I think looks tacky. So even though it's a PRDS contract, typically that box is checked to line out all the seller warranties. I'm just saying, right? And you could use it with all the seller warranties, but if there's a multiple offer situation, you're not going to get the house. So let me just explain, right? Why is this a bad idea? Right? Why is this a bad idea? So let's say this transaction is going to arbitration or court. You're being deposed. You're the one who wrote that beautiful addendum, as is, where is, right? You wrote that addendum. And the lawyer is saying, so would you please explain to the court what your purpose was in writing that in the addendum? What was your purpose? And you're like, well, what do you mean? And the lawyer says, well, was it your intention to change the language in the residential purchase agreement, which, by the way, already has language about the property is being sold as is in its present condition, subject to buyer's inspection rights? It already says that. Was it your intention to change the language in the residential purchase agreement to something else? Now, what would you say, right? You wrote in, because why do people write stuff like that? Because some other agent told them to do it. Or they saw it on an addendum they got and they said, that sounds kind of cool. I think I'm going to write that in all of mine. I refer to this as learning real estate out on the street. Right? That's what I refer to it. So you're that agent and you copied it and you put it into an addendum because you thought it looked cool. And the lawyer is asking you to explain why you did that. And what they're honing in on, was it your intention to eliminate the paragraph in the residential purchase agreement that talks about the condition of the property, was that your intention to modify the language written by attorneys that work for the California Association of Realtors? Was that your intention? And if you say, well, no, not really, then why did you write that in? Then why did you write that in? Are you just saying that you're writing in like random statements about things? You understand how many of you went to law school, right? How many of you are members of the bar? I'm talking about the one where lawyers go, not the other one. You know what I'm saying? And if the answer is none, then maybe, I'm just going to throw this out here, maybe you shouldn't be messing with the language in the contract that was written by real attorneys that work for the California Association of Realtors. I mean, maybe you shouldn't be doing that. Right? I'm just throwing that out. And what they're going to do is they're going to say, well, obviously you intended to eliminate the paragraph in the residential purchase agreement that talks about the condition of the property. That must have been your intention. Otherwise, why would you do it? Explain to us, why did you do that? And by the way, at this point, the agents start whimpering, in their seat, and ask if they could leave, right? So generally, it's not a good idea to just change things that were written by the lawyers. I'm just saying, right? Just don't mess with them. Now, sometimes brokers, and I've worked for brokers that have their own as-is clause, and sometimes certain people do, and if you're a broker, those, by the way, were typically written by lawyers that the broker or somebody knew, and if that's a requirement, then use it, but don't write stuff like that in, if you're the listing agent, in an addendum. Don't do it, right? It isn't impressive. When I see it, I'm thinking, I'm dealing with an agent who doesn't know what they're doing. One of the ones I recently saw that said something like that, they said, well, the agent has said she's been in the business for 15 years and she knows what she's doing. That doesn't mean an agent knows what they're doing. Right? It doesn't mean they know what they're doing. And by the way, almost every time I've been in the business longer than whoever that agent was. All right. So then the easiest way to fill this out is using a program called Glide. Right. I'm not going to go through this, but what I want to do now, and maybe we'll do this later because we're running on, I ranted too long about that. How do you fill out the inspection disclosure, right? There's this other property questionnaire, right? Basically, they're answering questions. You ought to read their answers. Here's an agent's visual inspection disclosure. Why don't we make fun? Take a look at this while we have a minute. Would you recommend Glide for disclosure or Disclosures IO? They both work pretty much the same. In some MLSs, some associations, you get access to Disclosures IO. I believe I have a Glide account. They all work pretty much the same. Glide, by the way, is something that is provided. You get a version of it through CAR. I'm going to do a class on Glide. I don't use Disclosures IO because it's not a freebie in my MLS. So let's just we'll just take a minute and look at her, ABID. So if the property is a duplex, triplex, then we would put in, if it was a fourplex, we would do 4 ABIDs, 1 for each unit, and we would mark them here. The name of the company, that's fine. Here's just information. Seller has initialed it. Again, that first line is if it was a fourplex. Inspection performed by, name of the company, that's right. The date, weather conditions, other people present, who else might be present? And the answer might be the buyer. A question is the seller disclosure checklist from CAR, the handout link, and the answer is yes. The link that I gave you, the thing that I have in the handouts, which is the checklist, is provided by the California Association of Realtors, their legal department, updated in, I think, 2021, which, and we're going to go through some of the sneakier ones. Entry. Now, one of the issues about this, why don't we just talk about this? What does the word minor mean? Are we referring to somebody under the age of 18? Somebody who digs iron ore out of the ground? or we're saying it's not a significant scratch. Now, do you understand what you don't want to do on an AVID? What you do not want to do is make judgment calls, right? You do not want to have adjectives, major, minor, natural, you don't say that. So she shouldn't say minor. Minor to who? Minor to her? Minor to the buyer? Who says they are minor scratches, right? Again, you don't want adjectives. You would simply say, and I would get rid of some. What does that mean? As opposed to a lot, as to many? You understand all judgmental work, scratches on the floor, dining area, scratches on the floor, space for the wine fridge. I don't know, right? If I would even include that, but who cares? Some scratches on the appliances. I would just say scratches on appliances, discoloration, and touch-ups on kitchen cabinets. Marks on the wall, I would get rid of some. New carpet on the stairs. What is the purpose of telling us that? I'm not sure. Maybe how new is new? Was it done the day before, that morning, a week ago, a month ago, 6 months ago? I don't know. Some marks on walls, some discoloration. I would get rid of the sums. I would just say there's discoloration and touch up, home office space outside the master bedroom. I'm not sure, is that really a disclosure? If you read, you're supposed to be talking about things that are material facts. Other things you could write in, there's a 2-car garage. I don't know, that's not, you understand, this is not a place to say 2-car garage for 4 spacious bedrooms, view from the kitchen, right? This isn't a marketing piece, right? You just go and you look for things, right? And by the way, I'm going to go through this in greater detail, maybe in another class, but I just thought I would kill the last few minutes by looking at this, signed and all of that sort of stuff. And then we go on to agency disclosure. Anyhow, I'll spend a little more time on how to fill out the AVID, how to know what to say, how important is it if you miss something. The answer is probably not that important, as long as you have a property inspection, a termite inspection, and all the inspections and reports and anything there is disclosed, but we'll do that in another session. I hope that was fun. I thought so. I had fun. And that's part one. There's a lot of disclosures, right? We're going to spend a couple of weeks going through all of the fun disclosures, how to fill them out, what to do, what to say. And by the way, if you're interested in improving your real estate business and you would like to have somebody like, me, that was available to help you with your transactions, to advise you on how to write addendums and how to respond to agents, especially when the going is tough. And if you would like some help, you can reach out to me, because I'd like to talk to you about some of those opportunities, right? You don't have to live like this anymore. You could have help. Thank you very much. Talk to you later. Bye, everybody.